Blood trickled from my temple down my cheek as I caught my son's terrified eyes. I'd just been slapped so hard I'd collapsed. The house I once called my safest place had become a battlefield, and my own flesh and blood had fired the first shot. They thought I'd leave quietly. They didn't know I'd be back, and none of them would forget that day. My name is Samantha Reeves, and I'm 34 years old. As I lay there on my parents' kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath my head where it had struck the table edge, I wondered how we'd gotten here. My 7-year-old son, Evan, was screaming, his small hands reaching for me while my mother stood frozen in the doorway, her face a mask of cold indifference. "Mommy, Mommy!" Evan's voice cracked with terror, but when he tried to run to me, my father grabbed his shoulder, holding him back. "Stay there, boy," Howard growled, his hand still stinging from the blow he'd delivered. The same hand that had once taught me to ride a bike now throbbed with the violence of what he'd done. I pushed myself up slowly, my palm slipping in my own blood. The kitchen spun, but I forced myself to focus on my son's face. His eyes were wide with a fear I'd never wanted him to know, the fear of watching someone you love get hurt by someone who should protect them. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, though nothing about this was okay. "Mommy's fine." My mother finally spoke, her voice cutting through the air like ice. "Pay rent or get out." Janet's words were measured, deliberate. She stepped over my blood as if it were nothing more than spilled coffee, moving to the sink to rinse her hands. "I'm tired of housing freeloaders." Freeloader. The word echoed in my skull along with the throbbing pain. 3 months. We'd been here 3 months since my divorce was finalized, and every day had been a careful dance around their contempt. But this was different. This was the end. I remember the phone call that had brought us here, my voice shaking as I'd asked my mother if Evan and I could stay with them, just for a little while. The pause before she'd answered should have been my first warning, but desperation makes you blind to red flags, and I'd been drowning in bills, lawyer fees, and the crushing weight of starting over at 34. "Can you stand?" Howard's voice held no concern, only impatience, as if I were inconveniencing him by bleeding on his floor. I pulled myself to my feet, using the table for support. The room tilted, and I tasted copper in my mouth. Evan broke free from my father's grip and ran to me, his small arms wrapping around my legs. "We're leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About time," Janet muttered, not even turning from the sink. I looked at my parents, really looked at them. Howard with his permanently furrowed brow and clenched fists. Janet with her perfectly styled hair and designer clothes that meant more to her than her daughter's blood on the floor. These people who had given me life had just shown me exactly what I meant to them. Nothing. "Evan, go pack your things," I said softly. "Get your backpack and put your favorite toys in it." "But Mommy, you're hurt." "Go, baby, I'll be right there." As his footsteps faded up the stairs, I faced my parents one last time. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook, where I'd done homework at this very table, where I'd announced my engagement and later my pregnancy. It all felt like a lie now. "You know what's funny," I said, pressing a dish towel to my bleeding temple. "I used to tell people how lucky I was to have parents I could count on. I defended you when Greg said you were cold. I made excuses for every cruel comment, every judgmental look." I laughed, but it came out broken. "And for what? So you could assault me in front of my child because I asked you to stop screaming at him over spilled orange juice." "Drama queen, just like always," Janet said, finally turning to face me. "This is why your marriage failed. This is why you're 34 with nothing to show for it but debt and a child you can't support." The words were meant to wound, and they did, but they also crystallized something inside me. This wasn't just about today. This was about every moment they'd chosen cruelty over compassion, judgment over support. And now my son had seen it all. "We'll be gone within the hour," I said. "Good," Howard replied, "and don't expect any help from us. You made your bed. As I climbed the stairs, gripping the banister to keep from falling, I heard Janet's voice drift up. Clean up that blood before you go. I have book club at 2. 3 years ago. I had everything. Or at least, that's what it looked like from the outside. We lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Boise, Idaho, with a view of the foothills and a backyard where Evan learned to walk. Greg made good money as a software engineer, and I worked part-time as a graphic designer while raising our son. We were the couple everyone envied at neighborhood barbecues. The morning I discovered the truth started like any other. Greg had left for an early meeting, and I was cleaning up breakfast when his iPad chimed on the counter. He'd forgotten it again. The message preview showed just enough. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to do it again. Kelly. Kelly, his coworker. The woman who'd been to our house for dinner just 2 weeks before, who'd complimented my lasagna and played with Evan in the living room. My hands shook as I opened the message thread. 3 months of texts, explicit photos, meeting times that aligned perfectly with Greg's late projects and client dinners. The detail that made me vomit in the kitchen sink a photo of Kelly wearing the earrings Greg had given me for our anniversary, the ones I'd thought I'd lost. When Greg came home that evening at 6:15, I had printed everything. The stack of papers sat on the dining room table like evidence in a murder trial. He walked in, saw them, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally, a shrug. "So you know," he said, setting down his laptop bag as if we were discussing the weather. "That's it. That's all you have to say." He loosened his tie, that practiced gesture I'd once found attractive. "What do you want me to say?" "Sam. That I'm sorry. Fine. I'm sorry you found out this way." "You're sorry I found out." The words came out as a shriek. "Not sorry you've been fucking your coworker for 3 months. Keep your voice down. Evan's upstairs." "Don't you dare act like you care about our son now." Greg sat down, his posture relaxed, almost bored. "Look, these things happen. We've been married 8 years. The spark dies. Kelly and I just connect. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal. You gave her my anniversary earrings." "I bought those earrings. Technically, they were mine to give." That's when I knew. This wasn't a man who'd made a mistake. This was a man who'd been wearing a mask for years, and now that it was off, he didn't even care enough to pretend anymore. The divorce was brutal. Greg hired Shannon Whitman, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Boise. Someone at work had warned him I'd been researching lawyers, so he filed first, claiming abandonment of marital duties and painting me as an unstable spouse who'd been emotionally absent. Every asset was fought over. The house went to him since it was purchased with his family's help. A detail I'd forgotten was in writing. The savings accounts were mysteriously depleted by business investments he'd made in the weeks before filing. My part-time income was used against me, proof that I wasn't a serious contributor to the household. "You'll get standard custody," my lawyer assured me, "and child support, of course." But Greg fought that too. Suddenly, his 6-figure salary was reduced on paper through creative accounting. His lawyer argued that since I'd been the primary caregiver by choice, I'd limited my own earning potential voluntarily. The child support order came through at $900 a month, barely enough to cover daycare. The worst part was the gaslighting. Greg told mutual friends that I'd been checked out of the marriage for years, that he'd tried counseling a lie, that Kelly had been a shoulder to cry on when I'd rejected him another lie. Some believed him. The neighborhood barbecues stopped including us long before the divorce was final. I remember the day I moved out, Evan clinging to his teddy bear as we loaded our things into a rented truck. Greg stood in the doorway of what was now his house, texting on his phone. Kelly's car was already parked in what used to be my spot in the garage. "Daddy, why can't we stay?" Evan had asked. Greg had looked up from his phone just long enough to pat Evan's head. "Ask your mother, buddy. This was her choice." 6 months later, the credit cards were maxed from lawyer fees. The apartment we'd moved to raised the rent. Greg's child support payments were consistently late, and taking him to court meant more legal fees I couldn't afford. My freelance clients had dwindled during the divorce chaos, and rebuilding took time I didn't have. That's when I made the call to my mother. Rock bottom has a way of making you forget why you left home in the first place, but as I stood in their kitchen 3 years later, blood still dripping from my temple, I realized that some homes were never safe to return to. Some families were better left in the past, no matter how desperate the present became. The phone call to my mother had been one of the hardest I'd ever made. It was a Tuesday evening at 8:45, and Evan was asleep on the couch of our cramped apartment, exhausted from another day at the overcrowded daycare I could barely afford. "Hello." Janet's voice was crisp, formal, as if I were a telemarketer interrupting her evening. "Mom, it's me, Samantha." A pause. "I know who you are. What do you want?" I closed my eyes, pride warring with desperation. "I need help. Evan and we need a place to stay. Just temporarily. Maybe a few months while I get back on my feet." The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, "I'll need to discuss this with your father." "Mom, please, I wouldn't ask if I had any other option. It's for Evan." "I said I'll discuss it with Howard. Call back tomorrow." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, remembering the mother who'd once stayed up all night when I had the flu, who'd driven 6 hours to surprise me at college. Where had that woman gone? The next evening, she called back. "You can come," she said without preamble. "But there are rules. This is our home, not a hotel. You'll help with housework, buy your own food, and keep that child under control. Any problems, and you're out." "Thank you," I whispered, hating how grateful I sounded. "We won't be any trouble." "We'll see about that." The first week had been deceptively calm. My parents lived in the same 2-story colonial where I'd grown up, though everything had been updated to Janet's exacting standards. Evan and I shared my old bedroom, now converted into a guest room with none of my childhood remnants remaining. "Don't touch Grandma's things," I warned Evan repeatedly. "And use your indoor voice." He nodded solemnly, already sensing the tension that permeated the house like a gas leak waiting for a spark. The subtle criticisms started immediately. Janet would watch me make Evan's lunch. Lips pursed. Peanut butter again. No wonder he's so thin. When I bought generic cereal to save money, I suppose that's all you can afford. When Evan laughed too loud at cartoons, "Can't you control him?" Howard was worse in his silence. He'd sit in his recliner, watching Fox News at volumes that made conversation impossible, grunting disapproval whenever Evan walked by. He'd inspect the house after I cleaned, running his finger along surfaces, shaking his head at imaginary dust. "Your father's very particular," Janet would say, as if I hadn't lived with his obsessions for 18 years. The real problem started in week 3. I'd spent $40 on new shoes for Evan. His old ones were falling apart, and I'd found a sale at Target. Janet discovered the box in our room while I was at a job interview. $40, she announced at dinner, holding the receipt like evidence. "For children's shoes. When you're supposedly broke." His shoes had holes. I have shoes from 10 years ago that are perfectly fine. It's called taking care of things. Samantha. But then, you never did learn the value of money. "Janet," Howard said, not in defense but in warning. "Not now. Not in front of the boy." But the damage was done. Evan pushed his plate away, appetite gone. He'd been doing that more lately, going quiet whenever my parents entered a room, flinching when Howard's voice boomed from the living room. The passive-aggressive attacks escalated. Janet would reorganize whatever I'd cleaned, sighing dramatically. She'd make comments to her book club friends on the phone, loud enough for me to hear, "Yes, she's back home, divorced. Poor thing never could keep a man happy." She went through our room while we were out, rearranging Evan's carefully organized Pokemon cards, throwing away drawings he'd made because they were clutter. When I confronted her, she smiled that cold smile I remembered from childhood. "My house, my rules. If you don't like it, there's the door." Always that threat. dangled like a sword over our heads. Where would we go? How could I explain to Evan that we might have to sleep in the car? So I swallowed my anger, bit my tongue, and watched my son shrink into himself more each day. Howard's contribution was constant judgment disguised as concern. Still no job. Maybe you're being too picky. That boy needs discipline, not coddling. In my day, divorced women didn't run home to mommy. They invited relatives over for Sunday dinners, where I became the cautionary tale. Poor Samantha, Aunt Linda would cluck. Such a shame about the divorce. But then, she always was difficult. I'd sit there, cutting Evan's meat into smaller pieces, pretending not to hear as they discussed my failures like I wasn't in the room. The worst part was watching Evan absorb it all, his bright spirit dimming like a flashlight with dying batteries. By month 3, the house felt like a prison with walls made of judgment and locks made of desperation. Every day was a minefield of potential criticisms. Every night, I'd lie awake listening to Evan's breathing, wondering how much damage this was doing to him, wondering if homelessness would actually be worse. I should have left then, should have seen that some help comes with a price too high to pay, but I told myself it was temporary, that I could shield Evan from the worst of it, that family meant something even when it hurt. I was wrong. Family isn't just blood. Sometimes, blood is exactly what they want to draw. The humiliations became a daily ritual, each one carefully crafted to remind me of my place. Janet had perfected the art of cruelty wrapped in concern, while Howard's involvement grew from silent disapproval to active participation. It started with the mail. I'd applied for dozens of jobs, and responses were finally trickling in. One morning, I found Janet at the kitchen table, my opened letters spread before her like tarot cards predicting failure. "Rejection from Morrison Tech," she announced, sipping her coffee. "Rejection from Dataline Solutions. Oh, and this one's interesting. They want a second interview, but the pay is insulting. $15 an hour, that won't even cover your gas." "You opened my mail." My voice shook with controlled rage. "It was delivered to my house. I wanted to make sure it wasn't important." She folded the letters with deliberate precision. Clearly, it wasn't. When I landed the interview at Morrison Tech, I'd used the last of my savings for a professional outfit, a simple black blazer and pants from a discount store, but clean and presentable. The morning of the interview, I found the blazer in the laundry room, stained with bleach. "Oh dear," Janet said when I confronted her. "I was doing whites. It must have gotten mixed in somehow. These things happen when you leave your clothes lying around." The blazer had been hanging in the closet. We both knew it. Evan's school project became another battlefield. He'd worked for days on a diorama of the solar system, carefully painting styrofoam balls, stringing them with fishing line. His face glowed with pride as he showed it to me. "Can we put it on the dining room table until tomorrow?" he asked. "Mrs. Patterson said we could bring them in early for extra points." That evening, we returned from grocery shopping to find the project destroyed. Planets scattered across the floor. Jupiter split in half. The cardboard base bent and torn. "The cat knocked it over," Howard said without looking up from his newspaper. "They didn't have a cat." Evan's face crumbled. He didn't cry. He'd learned not to cry in this house, but something in his eyes broke. I spent all night helping him rebuild it, but the magic was gone. He got a B instead of the A he'd deserved. The family gatherings were orchestrated humiliations. Janet would invite her sister Carol and Howard's brother Mike for Sunday dinners, setting the stage for my public shaming. "Samantha's still job hunting," she'd announce as I served the pot roast she'd insisted I cook. 4 months now, but she's being selective. The word dripped with sarcasm. "Maybe she's aiming too high," Carol would chime in. "Not everyone can afford to be choosy." "I had 3 interviews this week," I'd say quietly. "And how did those go?" Janet's smile was shark-like. "Any callbacks?" My silence was answer enough. The table would fill with advice I hadn't asked for, judgments disguised as help, while Evan pushed food around his plate, shoulders hunched. Howard's transformation from silent observer to active participant was gradual but devastating. He began inserting himself into my parenting, undermining me at every turn. Bedtime. I'd tell Evan at 8:30. "Let the boy stay up," Howard would boom. "You baby him too much." "He has school tomorrow." I said he can stay up. My house. My rules. Evan would look between us, confused and anxious, learning that Mommy's words meant nothing here. The financial inspection was the worst. Janet decided she needed to help me budget, demanding to see my bank statements, receipts, every penny accounted for. When I refused, she threatened eviction. "How can I help if you won't be honest about your situation?" she'd say, loud enough for Evan to hear. No wonder Greg left. Secrets and stubbornness. So I'd sit at their dining room table while they pored over my finances like vultures over carrion. Every purchase questioned, every decision mocked. $12 for a Happy Meal, that's wasteful. Evan was sick. We were at the doctor's office for 3 hours. Excuses, always excuses. Howard discovered I'd spent $8 on art supplies for Evan crayons and construction paper from the dollar store. His face turned purple. Art supplies. The boy needs discipline, not finger painting. You're raising him soft, just like you. He's 7 years old. When I was 7, I was working in my father's shop every day after school. That's what builds character, not this coddling nonsense. The breaking point was approaching, though I didn't know it yet. Each day, their behavior escalated. Janet threw away Evan's favorite stuffed animal, claiming it was ratty. Howard started making Evan do push-ups as punishment for minor infractions, spilling milk, talking too loud, existing too visibly. "Please," I begged them one night after Evan had cried himself to sleep. "He's just a little boy. This is hurting him." "Well, what's hurting him is having a failure for a mother," Janet replied smoothly. "We're trying to install some backbone in both of you. God knows you need it." They tag-teamed their cruelties now. Howard would yell at Evan until he was near tears. Then Janet would swoop in with false comfort, poisoning him against me. "Your mother should have taught you better. That's why Grandpa's upset." I started seeing changes in my son. He wet the bed for the first time in 3 years. He flinched when anyone raised their voice. He stopped drawing, stopped playing, stopped being the bright, curious boy I'd raised. "Mommy," he whispered one night, "why don't Grandma and Grandpa like us?" I held him close, feeling his small body tremble. "Sometimes people show love in different ways." I lied. "This doesn't feel like love," he said, and my heart shattered. He was right. This wasn't love. This was systematic destruction, designed to break us both. And it was working. That morning started with deceptive calm. It was Saturday, 9:30 a.m., and Evan was eating breakfast at the kitchen table while I cleaned up. Janet was at her yoga class, and Howard was in his study. For once, the house felt almost peaceful. Then it happened. Evan reached for his glass of orange juice, his elbow catching the edge of his cereal bowl. The bowl spun, milk splashing across the table, soaking into Janet's prized Irish linen tablecloth, the one her mother had given her, the one we were never supposed to use. "Oh no," Evan whispered, his face draining of color. "Mommy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "It's okay, baby. Accidents happen." I grabbed paper towels, trying to soak up the mess before... "What the hell is going on here?" Janet stood in the doorway, yoga mat under her arm, face twisted with rage. She must have forgotten something and come back. Her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, and I saw something shift in her expression, something dark and final. I started. "Get away from it. You're making it worse." She shoved past me, examining the stain like it was a mortal wound. "Do you have any idea what this is worth? Any idea at all?" "Mom, it was an accident. He's 7. He's old enough to be careful. But no, you let him do whatever he wants. And look what happens." Her voice rose to a shriek. This tablecloth survived 60 years, and your brat destroys it in seconds. Don't call him that. My voice was low, dangerous. Evan started crying, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. Janet rounded on him. Stop that sniveling, you're not a baby, though God knows your mother treats you like one. No wonder you're so careless, so destructive. That's enough. I stepped between them. You will not speak to my son that way. Your son. Janet laughed, ugly and sharp. You can't even provide a roof over his head. You're nothing but a burden, a leech, a failure who crawled back here because no one else would take you in. Howard appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting. What's the problem now? Your grandson destroyed Mother's tablecloth, the one piece I have left of her, and this little monster. He's not a monster. The words ripped from my throat. He's a child who made a mistake, but you wouldn't know anything about forgiveness, would you? Nothing's ever good enough for you. Nothing I do, nothing he does. Because you're both disappointments, Janet screamed. I raised you better than this divorced broke, raising a wild child with no discipline. At least I don't terrorize children to feel powerful. The room went silent. Howard's face flushed deep red. You ungrateful little bitch, he said quietly. After everything we've done for you. Done for me. You've made our lives hell. You've bullied a 7-year-old boy. You've torn apart every bit of confidence. Why, we took you in when no one else would, Janet shrieked. Fed you, housed you, put up with your failures and excuses and that boy's constant noise and mess. Then we'll leave right now. We'll pack our things and— You'll leave when we say you can leave, Howard roared. This is our house. And that's all you care about, isn't it? Your house, your rules, your control. Years of suppressed rage poured out. You've tormented my son. You've made him afraid to speak, to play, to be a child. What kind of grandparents do that? The kind who are trying to fix what you broke. Janet stepped closer, finger jabbing at my chest. But you're too stupid to see it, too proud to admit you're a failure as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter. Stop it, Evan sobbed. Please, stop fighting. I'm sorry about the juice. I'm sorry. You should be sorry, Janet whirled on him. Look what you've caused. This is what happens when children aren't properly raised. That's when I snapped. Don't you dare blame him for your cruelty. You're the monsters here. You're the ones who should be sorry. Howard moved so fast I didn't see it coming. His hand connected with my face with a crack that seemed to echo off the walls. The force spun me around, and I stumbled, my temple catching the corner of the table as I fell. Pain exploded through my skull. The world tilted. I heard Evan screaming, saw his terrified face through a haze of stars. Blood ran warm down my face, dripping onto Janet's precious floor. Mommy, Mommy. Evan tried to run to me, but Howard caught him, holding him back with one meaty hand. See what you made me do? Howard's voice was steady, matter of fact. This is what happens when you disrespect your parents. Janet stood frozen for a moment, then stepped over me to get to the sink, her heel nearly catching my hair. Pay rent or get out, she said, turning on the water to rinse her hands as if washing away the whole scene. I'm done with both of you. I pushed myself up on shaking arms, blood dripping onto the floor, and looked at my parents. Really looked at them. Howard, standing tall and righteous, still gripping my sobbing son. Janet, calmly drying her hands on a dish towel, careful to avoid the one with my blood on it. These weren't my parents. These were strangers who happened to share my DNA. And in that moment, bleeding on their kitchen floor while my son screamed for me, I made a decision. They wanted me gone. Fine. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We're leaving, I said, my voice steady despite the pain. Right now. Good, Janet said without turning around. And clean up that blood before you go. I have book club at 2. My hands shook as I threw our belongings into garbage bags we didn't even have proper suitcases. Evan sat on the bed, clutching his Pokemon cards, his face streaked with tears and snot. The cut on my temple had stopped bleeding, but dried blood still caked my face and hair. I'd clean it later. Right now, we needed to get out. "Where are we going, Mommy?" His voice was so small. "Somewhere safe, baby, I promise." But that was a lie. I had $47 in my wallet, a quarter tank of gas, and nowhere to go. The women's shelter had a 2-week waiting list. The cheap motels required a credit card for deposit, and mine were all maxed out. I called Melissa from the bathroom, whispering so my parents wouldn't hear. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Sam, what's wrong? You sound—" "Can Evan and I crash at your place just for tonight?" My voice cracked. "Please, Mel, I wouldn't ask if—" "Of course. Oh my God, of course. What happened?" "I'll explain later. We'll be there in an hour." Downstairs, Howard had returned to his recliner, volume cranked up on the TV like nothing had happened. Janet was scrubbing the table with bleach, erasing every trace of the morning's chaos. Neither looked up as I carried our bags to the door. "Mommy, my solar system," Evan whispered, remembering his rebuilt school project. "We'll make another one." I lied. There was no time. I loaded our pathetic pile of possessions into my beat-up Honda Civic, the one Greg had so generously let me keep in the divorce. Evan climbed into his booster seat, movements mechanical, eyes glazed. He was in shock. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror, blood in my hair, bruise already forming on my cheek, eyes wild with rage and fear. I looked like a victim. I looked like everything they said. I was a failure, a mess, a woman who couldn't keep her life together. But underneath the blood and bruises, something else was burning, something that had been dormant for years, suffocated by Greg's betrayal and my parents' cruelty. Rage, pure, crystalline rage. Melissa lived 40 minutes away in a cramped apartment above a nail salon. She met us at the door, took one look at my face, and pulled us inside without a word. Only after Evan was settled on the couch with cartoons and a juice box did she drag me into the bathroom. "Jesus Christ, Sam, we need to get you to a hospital." "No hospitals." I wet a washcloth, wincing as I dabbed at the cut. "They'll ask questions." "Good, they should ask questions. Your father assaulted you." "With what proof it's my word against theirs? And they're the respectable retirees with the nice house and standing in the community. I'm just the divorced daughter who couldn't make it on her own." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "This is so fucked up." "Yeah." I studied my reflection. The cut was deep, but not enough for stitches. The bruise would be spectacular by tomorrow. "Mel, I need to ask you a huge favor." "Anything." "Can we stay here for a few days, just until I figure out what to do?" "Stay as long as you need. The couch pulls out, and—" "We'll take the floor. We've imposed enough—" "Stop that!" She gripped my shoulders. "You're not imposing. You're surviving." That night, lying on Melissa's floor with Evan curled against me, I stared at the ceiling and made a list. Not a list of apartments to check or jobs to apply for. A list of everything they'd done. Every cruelty. Every humiliation. Every moment they'd made my son cry. Howard hitting me. Janet's verbal abuse. The destroyed school project. The bleached blazer. The opened mail. The financial audits. The way they'd made Evan do push-ups. The name-calling. The threats. The systematic destruction of a 7-year-old boy's spirit. "Mommy," Evan whispered in the dark. "Yeah, baby." "Are we ever going back to Grandma and Grandpa's house?" "No, never." "Good." He was quiet for a moment. "They're mean." "Yes, they are." "Is it my fault because I spilled the juice?" I pulled him closer, kissing the top of his head. "No, sweetheart. Nothing that happened was your fault. Grandma and Grandpa are sick in their hearts. They like hurting people. But we're safe now." "Will they come find us?" "No. and even if they tried, I won't let them near you again." He relaxed against me, trusting in a way that broke my heart. He believed I could protect him. He didn't know I had no job, no home, no plan beyond the rage burning in my chest. But maybe rage was enough. Maybe rage was what I'd been missing all along. I thought about my parents, probably sitting down to their Saturday dinner, complaining about the inconvenience I'd caused, about how they'd have to change the locks, how the neighbors might have heard the yelling, how I'd always been such a disappointment. They thought this was over. They thought they'd won. They were wrong. "Mommy." "Yeah." "I love you." "I love you too, baby, more than all the stars." He fell asleep, his breathing evening out, one small hand clutching my shirt. I stayed awake, planning. They'd taken everything from me, my dignity, my confidence, my sense of safety. They'd terrorized my child. They'd drawn blood. In their arrogance, they'd forgotten one crucial thing: I was their daughter. They'd raised me. They'd taught me to be ruthless when cornered, to fight dirty when necessary, to never forgive a slight. They'd created me, and now they were going to live with the consequences. The vow I made that night was simple. They would pay, not just for what they'd done to me, but for every tear they'd caused Evan to shed. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way to make them regret the day they decided to break us. Because we weren't broken. We were forged in their cruelty, hardened by their hatred, and we were going to rise from these ashes, whether they liked it or not. The plan started with documentation. Every bruise, every cut, every moment of trauma needed to be recorded. Melissa helped me take photos the next morning, close-ups of the gash on my temple, the purple-black bruise spreading across my cheek, the defensive marks on my arms from when I'd tried to shield myself. "We need to file a police report," Melissa insisted. "Not yet, I need more." I'd been recording audio on my phone for weeks without telling anyone. Janet's rants about what a disappointment I was, Howard's verbal abuse, the sound of Evan crying after they'd humiliated him. But it wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. I needed a paper trail. First, I took Evan to see Dr. Sarah Winters, a child psychologist Melissa recommended. Watching my son sit in that bright, toy-filled office, unable to make eye contact as he whispered about his grandparents, nearly broke me. "He's showing signs of emotional trauma," Dr. Winters told me privately after the session. "Regression, anxiety, fear response to authority figures. How long has this been going on?" 3 months, since we moved in with my parents." She made notes, her face carefully neutral. "I'll need to document this for his file. And Mrs. Reeves, if there's been any physical violence." "There has, against me, in front of him." "Then I'm mandated to report this to—" "I know. I'm building a case. Can you give me a week?" She studied me for a long moment. 1 week? Then I file the report regardless. Next came the legal consultation. Diane Morrison came recommended by a friend of Melissa's, a small-town lawyer who specialized in family law and domestic violence cases. Her office smelled like coffee and old books, and she listened without interrupting as I laid out everything. "The audio recordings are good," she said, reviewing my phone. "The photos are better. Dr. Winter's report will be crucial, but we need more for what you're planning." "What else?" "Character witnesses, paper trail showing a pattern, and—" She leaned forward. "You mentioned your mother goes through your things. Did she ever text or email about it? Leave notes." My heart jumped. She sent texts, lots of them, demanding to see my bank statements, criticizing my parenting, threatening eviction. "Forward them all to me, every single one." I spent 2 days gathering evidence, screenshots of Janet's texts telling me I was a pathetic excuse for a mother, emails where she detailed my failures to extended family members Melissa had connections who forwarded them to me, photos of Evan's destroyed school project, the receipt for the blazer she'd ruined, dated the day before my interview. Then came the unexpected gift. My former neighbor, Mrs. Chen, called Melissa's apartment looking for me. Samantha, I've been worried sick. I saw Howard push you into your car that day. You were bleeding, and that poor baby was screaming. You saw that? Honey, half the street saw it. Mr. Garcia was about to call the police, but Howard went back inside, and you drove off so fast. Would you be willing to write a statement about what you witnessed? Of course. That man has no business putting hands on anyone, especially not his own daughter. 3 more neighbors came forward with similar stories. They'd heard the screaming matches. They'd seen Evan's face when we'd leave for school, hollow-eyed and silent. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down had watched Janet throw Evan's art projects in the garbage can. I never said anything, she admitted shamefully. Figured it wasn't my business, but when I heard what Howard did to you, by day 5, I had a file 2 inches thick. Photos, recordings, witness statements, psychological evaluation, text messages, emails. Diane reviewed everything with the kind of satisfied smile that made me think she'd been a shark in a past life. This is good, really good. But there's one more thing we need to discuss. She folded her hands on the desk. The media. What about them? A story like this, respected retirees abusing their daughter and grandson, local news would eat it up. It's not necessary for the legal case, but if you want them to face real consequences. I thought about Janet's position with the Women's Auxiliary, Howard's golf club membership, their carefully maintained reputation in the community they'd lived in for 30 years. I know someone, I said quietly, a college friend who works at Channel 7. Perfect! But timing is everything. We file the reports first, let the investigation begin, then the story breaks. Maximum impact. That night, I explained to Evan that we needed to talk to some police officers about what happened at Grandma and Grandpa's house. His face went pale. Will they arrest me for spilling the juice? No, baby, never. You didn't do anything wrong. The police want to know about how Grandpa hurt Mommy and how scared they made you feel. Will Grandpa go to jail? I chose my words carefully. I don't know, but he'll have to answer for what he did, and they'll never, ever hurt us again. He nodded, that too old wisdom in his eyes. Good. They're bad people, aren't they? Yes, they are. But we're not bad, right? Even though we're related to them. I pulled him close. We're not bad. Being related to someone doesn't make you like them. You get to choose who you want to be. I want to be like you, he said. You're brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified, exhausted, and running on pure rage. But maybe that's what bravery was, being scared and moving forward anyway. The next morning, I walked into the police station with Diane, my file of evidence clutched in my hands. Officer Jamie Rodriguez took our statement, her face growing darker with each photo, each audio clip, each witness statement. We'll send someone out today, she assured me. Your parents will be questioned, and depending on what we find, charges may be filed. There's one more thing, Diane said smoothly. My client has reason to believe her parents may attempt to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. We'd like to ensure... We'll handle it. Officer Rodriguez interrupted. Trust me, we take domestic violence very seriously, especially when a child is involved. As we left the station, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Tom from Channel 7. Melissa gave me your contact. I'd like to hear your story whenever you're ready. I looked at Diane. She nodded. Tomorrow, I typed back. After they've been questioned? The pieces were in place. The fuse was lit. All that was left was to watch it burn. The morning it all came crashing down. I parked across the street from my parents' house at 7:45 a.m. Just as 2 police cruisers pulled into their driveway, I watched Howard answer the door in his bathrobe, his face cycling through confusion, indignation, and then something I'd never seen before, fear. The officers were there for 40 minutes. Through the window, I could see Janet gesticulating wildly, probably spinning some story about her ungrateful daughter. But the evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were credible. And somewhere in that house, they'd find my blood still staining the kitchen floor grout, despite Janet's obsessive cleaning. Tom from Channel 7 met me at a coffee shop that afternoon. He was younger than I'd expected, hungry for a story that would make his career. I gave him everything: photos, context, the pattern of escalation. His eyes lit up when I mentioned Janet's position with the Women's Auxiliary and Howard's status at the country club. "Pillars of the community hiding a dark secret," he murmured, already crafting his headline. "When do you want this to air?" "As soon as possible." "I can have it ready for the 6 o'clock news tomorrow." That night, Melissa helped me draft a Facebook post, not a rant or a plea for sympathy, but a simple statement. "Some of you may hear things about my family in the coming days. Please know that everything I've done has been to protect my son and myself from an abusive situation. Thank you to those who've supported us." I tagged every mutual connection my parents and I shared. The next evening, Evan and I ate dinner on Melissa's couch. The TV turned to Channel 7. At 6:15, Tom's segment began. "A shocking story of family violence has rocked the Riverside community tonight. Howard and Janet Reeves, longtime residents and active community members, are under investigation for domestic assault and child endangerment." My bruised face filled the screen, followed by the photos of Evan's destroyed projects, the witness statements, Dr. Winters explaining the psychological impact on children who witness domestic violence. "The couple's daughter, Samantha Reeves, says the abuse escalated over months, culminating in a violent assault that left her injured and her 7-year-old son traumatized." They'd blurred Evan's face, but his voice was clear in the recorded therapy session. "Grandpa hit Mommy. There was blood. I was scared." My phone exploded with calls and texts. Janet's sister Carol, who'd participated in so many humiliation dinners, sent a single message: "How could you do this to your parents?" I didn't respond. They'd chosen their side long ago. By the next morning, the story had been picked up by 2 other local stations. Janet's photo was splashed across the news websites with headlines like "Women's Auxiliary President Accused of Child Abuse" and "Respected Retirees Face Domestic Violence Charges." The country club released a statement distancing themselves from Howard. The Women's Auxiliary announced Janet's immediate suspension pending investigation. Neighbors who'd smiled and waved for 30 years suddenly remembered all the times they'd thought something seemed off about the Reeves family. 3 days later, I drove past their house again. A for sale sign stood in the yard, not the dignified sale they'd probably planned for retirement, but a desperate attempt to liquidate before legal fees destroyed them. Neighbors pretended not to see them. Their car was egged twice in 1 week. Howard was formally charged with assault, Janet with child endangerment. They hired expensive lawyers, of course, but the evidence was insurmountable. The sentence wouldn't be long first offense, their age. Good lawyers, but it didn't matter. Their reputation, the thing they valued above all else, was destroyed. I heard through the grapevine that they'd moved to a small apartment 2 towns over, where no one knew them. Janet lost her position permanently. Howard was banned from the club. Their Christmas card list, once 3 pages long, dwindled to nothing. 6 months later, Evan and I moved into a small but clean 2-bedroom apartment. I'd finally landed a decent job, and he was thriving in therapy, his light slowly returning. We were healing. One evening, sorting through mail, I found an envelope with familiar handwriting, no return address. But I knew. Inside, a single sheet of paper in Janet's perfect script. "I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed everything we built. Someday you'll understand what you've done." I looked at Evan, doing homework at our small kitchen table, humming to himself something he'd stopped doing at their house. I thought of all the nights he'd cried, all the mornings he'd been too scared to speak, all the ways they'd tried to break him. I lit the letter on fire over the sink, watching it curl into ash. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about satisfaction or revenge. This was about survival, about protecting my child, about refusing to let toxic people hide behind the word family. Standing in my own kitchen, in our safe space, Watching my son be a child again, I realized something I wasn't satisfied. I was free. We both were. And that freedom was worth more than their approval ever could have been. The house sold eventually, below market value. The new owners painted over the bloodstain in the kitchen, replaced the Irish linen tablecloth, filled the rooms with children's laughter instead of judgment. It became what it should have been all along, a home. I never drove by again. There was nothing there for us anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel that rage, not burning anymore, but glowing like embers, a reminder that love isn't always gentle. Sometimes love is fierce. Sometimes love has teeth. And sometimes, the fiercest love of all is knowing when to walk away and when to burn it all down behind you. They thought I would leave quietly, disappear into the shame they'd tried to wrap around me like a shroud. They were wrong. I left loudly, publicly, dragging their cruelty into the light where everyone could see it. My name is Samantha Reeves. I'm 35 now, and I am nobody's victim. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your experiences and perspectives matter, and I'd love to hear them.